They didn't notice you when you were fully present, when you were showing up, wholeheartedly, consistently, vulnerably. They looked right through you. They took their time replying. They assumed you'd always be there. They acted like your love was something they could pick up and put down at will. And now that you've gone silent, now that your energy has shifted, now that you're no longer waiting, explaining, proving, or asking, suddenly they feel it. The absence, the ache, the sharp contrast between your presence and your disappearance. And now they're interested. Why does this happen? Why is it that the moment you pull away, the very person who seemed distant or indecisive begins to chase you? Why do they feel magnetically drawn to the same love they once couldn't recognize? It doesn't make sense, not at first. But psychology has an answer, and it starts with a hard truth. People don't always respond to who you are. They respond to how your presence makes them feel about themselves. And when you were too available, too forgiving, too emotionally open, too understanding of their silence, you accidentally gave them a version of themselves they didn't have to earn. And in that comfort, they never had to confront the part of them that was incapable of receiving what you offered. But the moment you pulled away, the moment your energy stopped orbiting around them, you changed the mirror, and they were forced to look at what they lost, what they never claimed, what they might never get back. This is the moment avoidants feel the most. Not in closeness, but in distance. Not when love is offered, but when it's withdrawn. And here's what they won't tell you. You becoming unavailable doesn't just threaten their ego. It awakens their fear of insignificance. Because in your silence, they begin to wonder, was I never enough to keep them? Did I miss my chance? Are they done? For good? And now, they suddenly remember your worth. Not because you changed, but because you stopped trying to prove it. This isn't about game playing. This isn't manipulation. This is human psychology at its rawest. When something is always available, we subconsciously undervalue it. When it becomes scarce, it suddenly feels irreplaceable. And the moment you emotionally detach, you stop showing up in the role they took for granted. And you become something far more powerful in their mind. The one who got away. The one they didn't understand until it was too late. The mirror they no longer have access to. So the great question isn't, why do they want me now? The real question is, why did I have to disappear to be seen? Let's explore the hidden psychology behind this haunting shift. Because it's not just about attraction. It's about ego wounds, emotional scarcity, and how your silence speaks louder than love ever could. You were always there, not just physically, but emotionally, available, reliable, present in every way that mattered. You answered their silence with patience. You softened when they pulled away. You stayed, even when staying hurt. And without realizing it, you taught them that your love had no cost. That no matter how distant they became, how many mixed signals they sent, or how little they offered in return, you'd still be there. That's the hidden psychological dynamic. Because the human mind is wired in contradictions. We crave love, yes, but we also crave validation, challenge, and meaning. And when something is always available, when it's always within reach, the primitive part of our brain stops assigning it value. It's called the scarcity principle, a core bias in behavioral psychology. When something is rare or at risk of being lost, its perceived value skyrockets. This isn't just about material things. This happens with people, with love, with presence, with attention. And the tragedy is, the more freely you gave yourself, the less they knew what it was worth. But here's where it gets even deeper. Your pullback didn't just create scarcity. It triggered a rupture in their emotional equilibrium. Because your energy changed. And whether they can explain it or not, they felt it. They may not notice your absence in a logical sense. They may not even realize what shifted, but subconsciously, they sense the loss of your emotional gravity. The space that once felt safe now feels empty. The validation that once calmed their ego is gone. And suddenly, they're flooded with questions. Wait, why don't they text anymore? Why did their tone change? Why do I feel so unsettled? And that's the moment their brain begins to spiral. Because it wasn't just your presence they depended on. It was the emotional safety you created, even if they never said it, even if they pretended they didn't need it. They felt it. And now, with your emotional availability withdrawn, they're left with the echo of what you used to offer, and their own fear of what that absence means. Psychologists call this an attachment disruption. It's when the emotional bond a person took for granted is interrupted by distance, silence, or change, and it sends the nervous system into confusion because the pattern has broken, and with it, so has their sense of control. And here's the part they'll never admit. It's not just that they miss you. It's that your unavailability confronts something inside them. Their avoidance, their fear of connection, their belief that they could always come back to you. You didn't become more desirable just because you left. You became a mirror they could no longer avoid. Because now, there's no warmth to distract them, no conversation to lean on, no emotional comfort zone to crawl back into. There's just them, and the reality that you're not waiting anymore. And it terrifies them. Because if someone like you, someone who saw their wounds and still stayed, can stop caring, then maybe they really are unlovable. Maybe they really did ruin something real. Maybe you weren't just another person who left. Maybe you were the one who saw them, and they still couldn't show up. That kind of realization doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with quiet guilt, sleepless nights, sudden memories in the middle of the day. Words you once said that now echo with unbearable clarity. And here's the part they'll never say out loud. Your silence haunts them, not because you're being cruel, but because it forces them to feel what they made you feel. Unseen, unheard, unimportant. And for the first time, they taste the emptiness you quietly endured while they were inconsistent. The very thing they ran from, emotional accountability, is now the weight they carry in your absence. You didn't just change the dynamic. You dismantled the illusion, the idea that you'd always be an option, that they could delay, deflect, disappear, and still return to open arms. But when your heart finally closed its door, when you stopped begging to be understood, when your energy no longer leaned in, the dynamic snapped, and they were left standing in a silence they created, wondering why it suddenly felt like grief. Here's the irony. You becoming unavailable didn't break them. It simply stopped protecting them from themselves. Because your presence covered their fear. Your effort masked their emotional laziness. Your love gave them identity, even if they weren't ready to receive it. And now, they don't know who they are without it. So they may not call. They may not say they're sorry. They may not show up with flowers and closure. But their mind is loud. Their guilt is heavy. And every moment of silence between you is filled with the sound of everything they didn't say when they still had the chance. The unseen consequence isn't just that you left. It's that you left with their mirror. And now, they can't run from what they lost. There comes a moment when something inside you just snaps. Not in anger, not in rage, not in some dramatic explosion, but in quiet clarity. You wake up and realize you've spent too long trying to be enough for someone who was never ready to receive you. You've poured your soul into someone who mistook your consistency for convenience. And for the first time, you stop blaming yourself for their inability to love you properly. This is the rebellion. The moment you shift the pattern, the moment you say, no more. No more explaining yourself to someone who never truly listened. No more fighting for someone who only shows up when they feel you slipping. No more shrinking, softening, overcompensating, just to keep love alive. Because what you realize is that love should never feel like emotional survival. Healing begins the second you reclaim your energy, the second you stop chasing validation through people who only respond to your absence, the second you understand being wanted is not the same as being valued. Yes, they might want you now that you're unavailable, now that you've pulled away, now that your presence is no longer a guarantee. But is that want rooted in love? Or is it a reaction to losing control? You start to notice the difference, not just in them, but in you. You no longer check your phone every 5 minutes. You don't overanalyze silence. You stop bending yourself into someone they might finally choose, because you've already chosen yourself. And here's the most powerful part. Once you stop overgiving, you start receiving differently. You begin to attract what matches your healing, not your wounds. You stop clinging to potential and start honoring patterns. You stop craving attention and start seeking connection. Real, reciprocal, rooted in emotional safety, not survival mode. This shift, it's internal, but it echoes into every interaction. You no longer panic when someone pulls away, because you're no longer afraid of being alone. You no longer over-explain yourself, because your worth isn't up for debate. You no longer try to decode mixed signals, because you've outgrown confusion disguised as chemistry. And they feel this. The person who once took you for granted, they sense the change. They can't explain it, but something about your energy no longer feeds them the same way. You're not trying anymore, not because you're bitter, but because you're better. You stopped dancing for breadcrumbs. You stopped mistaking potential for commitment. You stopped loving people harder than they were willing to show up. And when that happens, the dynamic can never go back to what it was, because you're no longer the same version of you who begged to be seen. Now, you see yourself. You hold your own hand through the silence. You validate your own needs. You stop making excuses for someone else's emotional absence. You stop asking, why didn't they choose me? And instead ask, why did I keep choosing someone who wouldn't? That's healing. That's self-respect. That's the revolution that no one sees, but everyone feels. Because your new boundaries, they're not walls, they're doors. And only those willing to knock with care, consistency, and clarity get access. And the ones who mistook your availability for weakness, they find themselves locked out. Not because you're punishing them, but because you're finally protecting you. This is what happens when you stop overgiving. You begin to overflow in the right places, not to prove your worth, not to earn someone's presence, but because you've reclaimed the most sacred energy you've ever had, yourself. It wasn't cold, it wasn't heartless, and it definitely wasn't easy. Your detachment, the moment you stepped back, stopped reaching, and chose silence over begging, wasn't an act of cruelty. It was love, not for them, but for you, because you finally realized holding on wasn't keeping you connected. It was keeping you small, and loving them louder wasn't making them stay. It was making you disappear. You were loving from an empty place, hoping that your depth would eventually be enough for someone afraid to swim. But all it did was drown you. So you did the hardest, most terrifying thing imaginable. You let go, not because you stopped loving them, but because you started remembering how to love yourself. You detached to survive, to breathe, to remember what it feels like to not be in constant emotional suspense, to walk away, not as revenge, but as resurrection. And here's the final truth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop offering your heart to someone who only knows how to hold it with hesitation. Your detachment wasn't a power move. It was a healing move. It was the first time you said to yourself, I deserve more than almost. I deserve more than confusion. I deserve love that doesn't have to be chased. And in doing so, you gave yourself the greatest gift of all. Clarity. Clarity about who you are, what you need, what you will never again beg for. Because you are not here to be a backup plan. You are not here to teach someone how to appreciate you. You are not here to stretch yourself into silence, just to keep someone comfortable. You are here to love with depth, but also with discernment. To give, but not to bleed. To open your heart, but never again to someone who only knocks after they feel the door close. The one who took you for granted might feel the sting of your absence for a long time. They might come back with apologies, regrets, unfinished sentences. But by then, you won't be waiting, not out of bitterness, but because your healing has moved you to a place where you no longer bargain with your worth. And if they ever ask, why did you go so silent? Why did you stop trying? The answer will be simple. Because I finally started listening to myself. Your detachment was never about winning. It was about remembering. Remembering the version of you who didn't have to fight to be loved. The one who isn't defined by who stays or who goes. The one who is whole, even when they're alone. And that's the most dangerous version of you. The one who no longer begs for what they deserve. The one who walks away with grace, while carrying everything they once gave away too freely. So let this be the closing note. Not just to them, but to you. You are not hard to love. You were just trying to love someone who hadn't yet learned how to receive it. You didn't lose them. They lost the chance to become the kind of person who could meet you where you stood, with both feet, with open hands, with no fear of depth. And you rose. In silence, in strength, in self-worth. And that is a love no one can ever take from you again.